I would like to call the Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, October 16th, 2017 to order. This is the second session of the budget hearings, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown is absent at the moment. Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Council President Brady.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're going to depart slightly from the regular order, and anybody who has signed in for any public comment so far, we're going to hear them now. Who do we have?
Mr. Rico Dancy.
Please come forward. Welcome to the committee.
Mr. Dancy, can you hit the button on there?
Oh, good afternoon. For the people who get, last week y'all try to pass a bags increase on bags. For the people who get food stamps, who get 4 kids, I'm concerned about that. I got 4, 2 girls, 2 boys. And if people who get food stamps or assistance, can they get back off their card? Or can they lower their prices for people could afford to buy their groceries? How is that going to affect the bag? I got a couple people who called me on that. On the 24th this month, we having the 13th anniversary for the deaf culture at the city of Cleveland is doing it on the 13th, on the 24th of this month, from 11 to 2. Because the director at the speech had brought it to my attention for the cost of the bag. She said most of her clients, 50% of her clients are deaf, and they all get EBT. So can they use that when y'all do y'all proposal on the bag, or what can we do? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony, for your information. People who are on the SNAP food stamp program are proposed to be exempt from the bag fee. Do we have anybody else at this time?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And we will move to the main item of the day, and the clerk will please read the item.
Resolution number 2017-0182, adopting the 2018-2019 biennial operating budget and capital improvements program, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to make everybody aware of a scheduling change. We have been informed by the administration that on item number 4 on this list, Chief of Staff Sharon Sobel Jordan is not going to make a presentation of policy initiatives, and instead the policy initiatives are going to be presented along with the individual departmental presentations. The second thing is that the administration has provided us an update, a revision of the budget resolution, which provides totals and makes some corrections. I would like to ask Ms. Keenan to tell us a little bit more about the substitute, and if people are comfortable, I'm going to ask for a motion to substitute so we can get the updated version.
Good afternoon, Maggie Keenan, Office of Budget Management. The substitute that's been provided, the only difference from what was previously presented is that it totals by department. So on the first resolution that we submitted, it had the sums for personal services and other expenses, which are the two resolution categories, and it did not total by department, and the one that we're presenting today does.
Okay, thank you. Would one of my colleagues be willing to make a motion to substitute?
So move.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilman Schwan and a second from Ms. Conwell to substitute the version that's on your desks in front of you and making that the version of the resolution before the committee. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the substitute as the working version, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the resolution is substituted. And Ms. Brown has joined us. Thank you for the record. And I expect Ms. Simon, she's in the back. She'll be with us momentarily. Okay, so on to item number 1, the budget overview and summary. Ms. Keenan.
Okay. So I don't have a PowerPoint like I did last week. Last week, I think what did you say? Trevor already yelled at me for that. But we did present last week the general overview for the general fund and the levy funds, and then an overview on an all funds basis. I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know how much, if there's more detail you want on the individual fund basis before we start talking about the departments.
Are there any further questions on the overall budget numbers?
Not at this time.
We did notice that the ending number on the HHS levy is higher by about 7 million than what we saw in the last previous estimate. If you could give us a little bit of color on what helped bring about that positive outcome, and to what extent it's one time, and to what extent it reflects factors that might be sustainable for future years.
So it's changed from 7 million from when?
The year-end estimates that we've been previously seeing were for about 40 million for the ending balance, and it's now up to 40. Yeah, and
okay.
It's now up to 47
okay.
for 2017.
So it's not a one-time increase, but that does reflect increased revenue from federal and state sources, largely from Medicaid, from the enhanced Medicaid program that I would want to defer to probably David Merriman to talk about the details of the program. But we are expecting an additional $7 million that we can count on for as long as that program is in existence.
Okay, that's a very encouraging development. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, the item number 2 on the list is budget reductions and additions.
Just on the $7 million, though, I do want to be clear that we had anticipated that as part of the budget. So it's a change from second quarter, but not from the budget that we submitted. So it's not $7 million new today.
That's understood. You
okay.
You had told us in your presentation last week that we were going to get a better number on that okay. in the third quarter. So we didn't know the exact number, but we knew it was in the millions and that it was coming. So thank you.
Okay. Okay. So for the budget reductions, I can go through those by agency, and as always, you can interrupt me if you have questions. You don't have to wait till the end. I would prefer to be interrupted while we're going. So starting with the Court of Common Pleas, we applied a reduction to the court's budget of $3 million in the general fund. This is agreed to by the court. Originally, we had requested a $4 million reduction from the Court of Common Pleas, but they came back and said that there was no way that they could support a $4 million cut. So we did agree on $3 million. That's largely been applied to the court's personnel budget and a little bit to their other expenses budget, most notably in the assigned counsel line. So their budget does anticipate savings associated with attrition, not filling some vacant positions, and pretty heavy reliance on the court's special revenue fund. So I do want to note that the court is going to be drawing down cash balances in their various special revenue funds over the course of the next biennium. So the reduction that has been applied to the court is not sustainable long-term without having to decrease staffing levels in the court pretty significantly. Their budget is largely staff. So the court has their staff, they have the assigned counsel line, they pay about $500,000 every year for transcript fees, and the rest of that is all personnel. So any cut applied to the court is largely going to impact staffing levels. Any questions about comment, please? The next one is for domestic relations court. Their reduction was $300,000 to the general fund budget. This was also agreed to by the court. The reduction has been applied again to their personnel line. The court is assuming some savings from attrition, but they're also going to be taking a look at their staffing levels, and they anticipate that they will be able to eliminate some positions over the course of the biennium. The staffing levels in domestic relations court have been decreasing slightly, but they have been decreasing steadily every year, and the court thinks that it can continue that trend. And $300,000, we're only talking about a couple positions, so they don't anticipate that this would impact staffing levels at all. I do want to note that the court had previously contracted with the Department of Public Safety and Justice Service for mediation services in the court. They have ended that contract effective this month, I believe, and are going to be doing that service in-house. So they are hiring additional staff to cover that, but the money was already in their budget. The next one is juvenile court. Juvenile court, a cut has been applied to both the general fund and the HH levy fund budgets for the court. It was $1 million in the general fund, $4 million in the HHS fund. In total, the executive had asked for a $5 million cut to juvenile court. It was applied by the fiscal office, $1 million and $4 million, but we did indicate to the court that they could reallocate as needed between the two funds. The juvenile court's budget also assumes additional revenue from increase in fees and new fees that the courts assessed in order largely to support the increase in the wages from the National Center for State Courts wage study that council approved, I think about a month or so ago. I will note that the juvenile court is not in agreement with the cuts that have been applied to their budget, so I'm certain you will be hearing about that when their hearing comes.
Do we have a number on how far we're off from what they feel they could live with?
The court has effectively asked for a restoration of the cuts.
For what?
The restoration of the cuts that have been applied.
All the cuts, okay.
Correct.
That's a big problem, $5 million.
Probate court, they were applied a cut of $35,000 to the general fund budget. This was a combination of additional revenue and cuts. $10,000 was cut from the court's other expenses line, and then they have agreed to transfer $25,000 in special revenue fund dollars into the general fund. So we kept their general fund budget even in anticipation of that revenue, so it would be cost neutral. And the probate court has agreed to the cut. The next was the prosecutor's office, a $1.5 million reduction. This was exclusively applied to the prosecutor's personnel line. The prosecutor generally does have surpluses in personnel. They have a pretty high rate of attrition in that office, and Prosecutor O'Malley has agreed to the $1.5 million, again, anticipating some savings associated with attrition, and he has committed to making salary adjustments as needed, maybe reducing the 2% or not applying it for the full year in order to operate within this budget.
Ms. Keenan, to what extent does the prosecutor's budget reflect kind of getting to the end of what we were doing with processing all the rape kits, which was seen as a temporary surge in their staffing?
So They have grants that run through, I believe, 2020. So we will not see reductions in staffing levels until those grants run out. And I think it's halfway through the year in 2020. I can confirm that. But we're a little ways away from that. It's not in the biennium.
It's not a factor at this time yet.
No,
okay,
I don't believe
fine.
so, no.
Okay.
I do want to note on the prosecutor's office that we have also agreed to, the prosecutor has committed to transferring DTAC dollars as they become available to the county's demolition program. So if you recall, when we committed to the $50 million demolition fund, $2 million of that was supposed to come from the prosecutor's office, from the DTAC fund. That was a commitment made by the former prosecutor, Tim McGinty. When Mike O'Malley took office, he looked at the DTAC fund, rightfully so, noticed that the cash balance was getting pretty low. There is an ORC requirement relative to the cash balance in the DTAC fund. And he said, we can't transfer the money yet because the revenue hasn't been coming in like we thought it would. And he was concerned that we would be out of compliance with the ORC. We are making efforts to increase DTAC revenue, to increase tax foreclosures, and as that cash becomes available, Mike O'Malley has committed to transferring at least $1 million to the demolition program, which is not at this time anticipated in the budget.
Is that a one-time? Through the chair to Maggie, is that a one-time agreement?
It's a one-time, correct.
Thank you.
It's $1 million less than the original agreement that we had with the former prosecutor. The next one is the Educational Assistance Program. This is a scholarship program that's a partnership with the Workforce Development. It was budgeted at $1 million. We are applying a $500,000 cut, so cutting this program in half. This is largely used for scholarships for post-secondary education, either job training or college scholarships. The next one is the Personnel Review Commission.
Is it okay, Mr. Chair, before, you said it's okay if we stop you?
Please.
So Mr. Chair, clarification about the College Assistance Fund that's being cut. That is the funding we give to not only workforce, but the scholarship component is College Now. So they each have been getting a half, $500,000, and that was a council initiative.
That's
okay,
correct.
Thank you.
The next one is the Personnel Review Commission. There's a $200,000 cut applied to their budget. Personnel Review Commission is general fund, 100% general fund supported. This was applied to the personnel line. This would require 4 staffing reductions, so layoffs in force likely. The PRC is disputing this cut, and it's my understanding that they will be when they come to council asking for a restoration of the $200,000.
Yes.
Thank you. Of course, this was before my time, but does that $200,000 eliminate the entire program?
It does not, no.
What type of impact is that to that program?
Give me 2 seconds and I'll pull up their budget. So PRC is a $1.5 million agency annually.
1.5.
The 200 was calculated based on the commission's proportion to the general fund. So we looked at, what percentage do they make of the total general fund budget, and then we applied that same percentage to the deficit projected in the general fund.
Right.
But this would require staffing reductions because their budget is almost exclusively personnel. They do have a couple of contracts for testing services and consultation, and then they have a contract with the Archer Company to maintain the classification plan. But other than that, it's just staff.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Maggie, for the $200,000, I just wanted to let Councilwoman Baker know that was put in the last budget. So that was their ask, that they needed those positions. Is it one position or it's 2, isn't it? 2 that would be.
This would be at least 2 positions.
Yes. Okay.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification on the PRC reduction request. Was there an equivalent in the HR department?
There was not.
Okay. I think we need to be mindful of that as the PRC has the oversight for that department. So I just wanted to let the record reflect that from Councilwoman Baker. So you're welcome.
Vice President Jones.
And just another note, the PRC, this council gave a greater level of independence to this department from the executive's office, since those who make complaints would find themselves making complaints to those that they work for. So we created a greater level of independence. So we want to keep that in mind as well.
We did not just create the independence ourselves. It's also deeply reflected in the charter. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, please proceed.
I do want to make just one note on the reductions. I believe the executive mentioned this last week, but I can't remember. For the executive agencies, the way the cuts were applied is we grouped our agencies according to clusters, and then we identified a percentage cut for the cluster in total. So we did not look at it on a department-specific basis, which is why there was no corresponding cut to HR. The administrative cluster took a cut, so like fiscal, my department took the cut for the administrative cluster. The outside boards and commissions and the elected officials, they were handled differently.
Mr. Chair?
Please proceed.
Mr. Chair, through to the director, I can appreciate that. I'm not sure that we received a breakdown of the clusters and how that was determined. Certainly would like to be able to see that. In addition to, I don't think that we're required to make adjustments by clusters, given the fact that we don't know what those clusters are. So we look at the PRC versus and I shouldn't say versus, but when we look at the PRC, I'm as the HR chairperson, I am often looking to make sure that there is some balance when it comes to those two entities. So that was the rationale for, or the reason for the questioning behind that. So if you could provide the clusters for us, I don't know that we've gotten that. And then again, just want the record to reflect for us, we're not required to respond by that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely correct. And I can forward that. I thought I sent it to Turner, but he's shaking that I didn't. So I'll do that this afternoon.
So you're going to provide us a
Yes.
list of the clusters?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Mr. Chair, would this be similar to an org chart? Could this be a cluster org chart?
It is, so the clusters just briefly are like administrative, which would be IT, HR, fiscal, some portions of public works, and then we have public safety, which is the medical examiner, sheriff, because remember it's only the executive agency.
But is there somebody
So
over the cluster, or is it the executive? I mean, I would want
chiefs
to.
over each cluster.
I'd like to see who's the chief of the particular
Okay.
cluster.
No problem.
Okay.
I have that.
Councilman Tron.
And as I understood your comments, then these are based, there's a percentage that was being allocated against that cluster,
That's correct.
and you're going to give us the cluster structure and the percentage that's allocated against that?
Yes.
Okay.
I will preface, and you'll know this anyway when you get it, that the percentages that were proposed for each cluster is not necessarily what's reflected in the final budget.
I'd like to
So
see both proposal and
Absolutely.
and the actual budgeted.
So each cluster was given a target, but all of them didn't meet it. But I can get you that.
Yeah. And who determined the percentage of the targets? Where did that come from?
It was based on the percentage of the cluster in relation to the total general fund.
So there is just, the only correlation is a percentage of the total, and then we
Percentage of
allocate a
budget.
percentage.
That's correct.
So there's no bottom up zero base. What is our need? What's our effectiveness? What's doing, what department's doing a good job? What department's doing a bad job? We just applied a meat cleaver across the board.
Well,
percentage.
that was the original target, but that's why I do want to note that there's a difference between the targets and what the final outcome is, because we did have some departments in the cluster and some clusters in total who said, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but like, we can't do this. We can't possibly come up with the full percentage. And so we looked elsewhere to come up with the cuts. So the final budget is not the meat cleaver approach that you're talking about. That was how we started, just as a baseline.
Well, I know that. It doesn't make any difference what the final outcome was. That's the approach we took to start the game.
Well, that was just the initial, like, okay, here's what we're shooting for, is if we were looking at this based on the budget, it would be, I'm making up numbers here, but, $15 million for public safety, $10 million for administrative. But then when we looked at it in more detail, we realized that some clusters could do more and some couldn't meet their targets.
And you've been doing this for how long in public, in your professional background as far as working on budgets and finance?
I've been here for 10 years.
And prior to that?
I was in social services for 2 years.
Okay, so you weren't doing budget?
No.
And do you find that a flat percentage is the way to go about structuring an organization?
I think a flat percentage is a decent way to start the conversation, but as a final budget, no. And that's not what our final budget represents either.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
So the next one is for the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is, I believe Council's aware, gets a fixed $1.3 million subsidy from the general fund every year. This budget proposes cutting the general fund portion of the subsidy by $500,000 and supplanting that with road and bridge dollars. So they stay at the $1.3 million, but we're using two different funding sources. I will note that the Planning Commission has reservations about this proposal as well. Question?
To the chair, to Director, what did you say? What was the dollar figure? It's 500,000, isn't it?
500,000 of their $1.3 million subsidy.
Of the 1.3, okay.
So they're staying at 1.3, but we're using two different sources of funding. Yes, sir.
And taking that 500,000 from Public Works, Roads and Bridge project, what would that cut out for Public Works? Does that mean that there's another funding source that will make up that difference for Public Works to cover those projects? Could have been used for?
This is planning.
The road and bridge dollars can always be used for road and bridge projects. It's my understanding that these dollars were not programmed into specific projects, so it's not that doing this is going to require us to take a program off of the CIP. But if we didn't do this, the dollars would be available for road projects, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
And then
So the next several are for the Department of Development. One is to transfer the annual debt service on the Western Reserve bonds that were issued from the general fund to the Western Reserve Fund, which is the Economic Development Fund, also known as the Job Creation Fund. This debt was issued, I forget offhand now what year it was issued, but the annual debt service has been paid from the general fund. I believe the original intention was that it would be paid from the Western Reserve Fund, since this is why we issued the debt, so we are transferring that. And the Economic Development Fund / Western Reserve Fund had a cash balance in July of $16 million, unobligated cash balance of $16 million. Questions about that?
So through the chair to director, the development fund is really, you're just transferring funds. It's really not a budget deduction. It's
a budget reduction in the general fund, but you're correct. We're not reducing the expense itself.
Thank you.
The next one is a $1.5 million reduction to the subsidy from the general fund to the economic development fund. In 2017, we are subsidizing this fund $5 million. The intent was that it would be $5.5 million in 2018 and 2019. This budget assumes that we will decrease the general fund support by $1.5 million and increase the amount of revenue transferred from the casino tax fund to the economic development fund. So as part of the 2016-17 biennial budget, we did have an agreement with council to transfer $4 million from the casino tax fund to the economic development fund each year. The executive's recommended budget assumes that we will increase that transfer by $1.5 million. So essentially, the economic development fund remains whole, but again, the funding sources are different.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
What was the overall dollar amount for the casino revenue fund?
The revenue in that fund?
Right.
It's about $7.5 million.
$7.5 million.
Mm-hmm. And it's been fairly constant for the last couple of years.
Okay.
Ms. Keenan, what's the total amount flowing into the Job Creation Fund on an annual basis?
It's about from loan repayments. It's about $1.5 million.
No, I'm talking about loan repayments, general fund subsidies, casino revenue, everything that goes into it. How much goes into it on an annual basis?
It's not been consistent on an annual basis. In 2016, we transferred $13 million from the general fund, $14 million from the casino tax fund, and I think the loan repayments would have been a little under $1.5 million in 2016. In 2017, it's $5 million from the general fund, $4 million from casino tax, and $1.5 million in loan repayments. This fund has never had a steady stream of revenue that's been consistent every year.
Through the chair to Maggie, what's the average? I mean, it's not consistent, but
well, so it was like $18 million in 16, and then $10 million in 2017. And in 2018, we're still assuming the 1.5 in loan repayments, so we're not assuming there's going to be this influx of cash, but then 6.5 million from the casino tax revenue fund.
I think 2016 was basically getting the reorganization of this started. If you're looking for some kind of a pattern to work with, I think that the best indicator is 2017. The 4 million from the casino fund, 5.5 million from the general fund, and 1.5 million from the loan repayments. I think that's somewhat of a baseline that we can.
We are trying to keep revenue whole in 2018, just from different funding sources.
Yeah. Okay, Councilman Tron.
And the repayment from the Jumpstart acceleration, where does that show up?
That's the next one.
Okay, but
so
it seems like
that's
going into that same place.
It's going in the fund. So in 2017, we
received... That's much higher than the 1.5 million.
Well, yeah, it's 4.5 million from Jumpstart. So originally, we had anticipated that the subsidy next year would be, to the Economic Development Fund, would be 5.5 million. We're reducing 1.5 in anticipation of revenue from casino tax fund, and then the next one on the list is to eliminate the remaining general fund subsidy in 18 only, because they have the money from Jumpstart. The 4.5 million from Jumpstart.
So the idea of accelerating and collecting our money, the idea of actually taking the Jumpstart loan, which was scheduled to run for, I believe, 6-7 years on the initial, and the concept that if they had an event, to accelerate the prepayment of that loan, which was done in committee which I chaired, that successful idea, all we did was kick it down the road and take that money out of another place and took it away. So we did not get the acceptance of a repayment that was going into our loan fund. We did not get the access of those funds as though we would have achieved something. We actually took it away.
Well, we're not taking it away. What we're taking away is the general fund subsidy. So the overall fund has not been increased by the Jumpstart loan.
I understand, but the money but for the fact you would have still put the general fund money in there had the Jumpstart not had their event.
I can't say that that's true. We were faced with a $57 million deficit in the general fund, so I don't know what the executive would have done to clear that remaining $4 million. But I can't say that we would have kept the money in the Economic Development Fund.
Seeing how you raised the $57 million, what would have been the amount of money that would have come in to those funds but for them going into the queue, as far as the savings on the hotel and the savings on that? I think last time you testified, you thought it was going to be in the area of around $16 million. Did you ever come up with a number in that range as far as where those funds
that comes into the general fund?
That would have, yes,
queue?
but for?
So the 16 million would have been over the course of several years, if not the life of the debt. But on an annual basis, what we're looking at is, and it fluctuates somewhat, but it ranges from 1.5 to 2.5 million from the 0.25% fund, which is a sub-fund of the general fund. That's just a straight cash payment that comes out of that fund every year. I think it's 1.5 for the next couple of years, and then it goes up to 2, and then it goes down again. And then for the general operating fund, we will be foregoing the sales tax from playoff games at the Q. So that was estimated to be about $250,000 a year, and then the admissions taxes from the Q, which is estimated to be about $2 million a year, that would otherwise pay for debt service that the general fund pays.
And what was that total out to?
So on an annual basis, for the entire general fund impact, it would be about 3.5 million for the next couple of years, and then, like I said, it goes up a little and it'll go down.
Yeah, but total wise, it would have come out to, I think, as I recall, you said 16 million. In
over
that
the right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Keenan, since you're proposing increasing the casino transfer to 5.5 and the Jumpstart is 4.5 and the loan repayments are 1.5, does that mean that actually the job creation fund does get $500,000 more in 2018 than in 2017?
Yeah, it will have $500,000 more to use in 2018. The revenue actually posted in 2017, but there is $500,000 there, yes, that's correct.
$500,000, okay. Please proceed.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go to Ms. Baker.
Thank you. Just quickly to get some clarity on the Q money. Does the money that you just explained include the reserve fund? That if the ticket sales don't go as anticipated, that we will be the first dollar in to make up that difference?
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
So the annual contributions that the county makes feeds several different funds. One of them is the debt service fund, and one is the reserve fund, the cooperative reserve fund. There's like 3 different reserve funds that all have different names. So we are making those payments every year. If other revenue sources fall short, we can tap the reserve fund, yes.
Okay,
But we are making our payments every year regardless.
either way.
And we jump-started just last week. We transferred the 2016 and 2017 payments. So all of those funds have already been fed, so to speak, for this year.
Is that, if I may, is that in addition to the 16 million, or is that included?
It's included in the 16 million.
Okay, thank you.
So the 16 million, and I'll trust you that it is 16 million, but it was over the life of the debt, is the total general fund contribution. And on an annual basis, we are making from the different funding sources combined, I think it's about, it will vary, so it's between 3 and 4 million on an annual basis. The next one is also for the Department of Development. I discussed this a little bit last time, but we are proposing to eliminate the $8 million subsidy to the demolition fund, which was in 2018 only. That would have taken the fund to $48 million. So as I mentioned just a little bit ago, the $2 million difference is the DTAC money that would have come from the prosecutor's office. We had not reflected any intent to support the additional $2 million, but we are proposing to eliminate the $8 million in 2018. In 2019, we are proposing to transfer the $9 million cash balance in the demolition fund, unobligated cash balance, back to the general fund. So we are assuming that this $17 million is not necessary for the demolition program. And this is largely due to the infusion of federal hardest hit money, which we didn't anticipate getting at the time these subsidies were calculated.
Mike, am I correct? The administration's position is that the demolition program out of the general fund is being suspended but not canceled, and if down the road it occurs that we need more demolition money, that we would find it. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Ms. Simon.
I have a question about the $9 million you said would be transferred to the general fund. Is that, explain that money to me, where it's sitting now and how it's supposed to be used now?
So it's sitting in the demolition fund. So right now the demolition fund has a cash balance of, I thought I had it here, almost like 16 or $20 million. It's a substantial cash balance. Some of the money has been obligated, it just hasn't been spent yet. But this $9 million is surplus, for lack of a better term. So it largely came from proceeds of bonds that were issued. So we have traced each of the debt issues to see what the allowable uses were at the time the debt was issued. And this money largely can go towards capital projects. So the thinking is that we would transfer this to pay for the CIP, which is $7.2 million in each year. And then we have some other expenses in the general fund that the $9 million can be used for as well. But we have tracked down each one of the debt issues to make sure that we're using this for reasons that we anticipated as part of the debt issue.
Excuse me, thank you. If we transfer the balance that's sitting there and we have a surge of homes and properties that need to be demoed in the communities, which I'm sure we might even hear before the budget hearings are over, where would this money come from if we're just transferring into the general fund and we're going to spend it on other projects?
So if a commitment is made to continue to fund the demolition program, then we would have to look to the general fund, either the cash balance in the general fund, or we would have to cut expenses that had been programmed in this budget in order to free up dollars. So it's either cuts or cash balance.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, please proceed.
Next is the fiscal office. The fiscal office is supported through a number of funding sources, but they do have a general fund budget that we are proposing to eliminate $300,000 in both years. This was applied to the personnel line. We are anticipating reductions in staffing levels due to the implementation of both the ERP and the real property systems over the course of the biennium. We are also proposing to increase, this is again for the fiscal office, general fund revenue $3 million in 2018 and $500,000 in 2019 as a result of enforcing the rental registry that I will rely on Dennis to talk a little bit more about when he presents for the fiscal office. But we will get a surge of revenue in the first year when we do this. And then we looked at the other counties that have rental registries, looked at their fees and how much money they bring in on an annual basis. And the $500,000 is extremely conservative based on the fee that Cuyahoga County is proposing.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Simon.
So your budget assumes that there's going to be a rental registry, and that's not even been considered or been presented to council, and I'm sure there's going to be some major discussion and issues, and no guarantee that such a resolution or registry is going to pass. So how can we even begin to talk about having an influx of money in this budget when that's not even on the table as part of our consideration as a separate item?
So I am probably going to have to either get back to you or defer to Dennis on this, but my understanding was that the rental registry is already in place. We're just not enforcing it. So
the fee that they're looking to add to that registry.
Okay.
So the council really needs to oversee and look at. And so I'm just saying from where I sit, I hope this budget is, you can't continue on to include revenue that's not even going to necessarily be there. Okay. It's like the cart before the horse. So please, from this council person, I can't consider a budget that's going to contemplate revenue that's not even before council as a separate item.
Mr. Keene.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
my question is the administration intending to submit legislation to us on this subject, and if so, when would it be introduced?
I'll have to get back to you. My understanding was that we didn't have to submit legislation, but I could be wrong. We have a number of initiatives in this budget, so I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, well, we learned something significant today. That's why we have these hearings. Councilman Jones.
And you asked my question, legislation obviously is going to be needed. And again, how do you consider a budget when we haven't even seen this legislation? I have no idea how Councilwoman Simon is going to vote. So we're going to. But that was my question. Legislation is going to be needed, and it's hard to consider something that's going to impact the budget when we. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Councilman Tuma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, if the administration is talking about anything with respect to a fee for something like that, I think that would certainly warrant discussion from this body here. And it would seem that legislation would be needed from this body to collect a fee on something like that. So I think that's something that we definitely need to halt the brakes on and take a look at before making an assumption that it's going to be part of the budget as a whole. So, thank you.
Okay, please proceed. Ms. Baker.
Only to add on, if there isn't a policy in place, and if there is, but that doesn't include a fee, then this is out of budget. And I guess that's kind of the point here, is that we are adding $3 million of a cut to balance the budget, but if it's not realistic that this even exists, then we have a problem with saying that this is a balanced budget. Am I wrong on that, or?
I would respectfully disagree slightly, only in that this entire budget that's been presented is the collection of assumptions. So this budget assumes that we will collect $3.5 million over the course of the biennium in a rental registry. If we have to come to council, it's completely my error. There are details on some of these plans that I'm not privy to, but and I can talk about all of them as we get to it, although I think this is one of the largest of the revenue enhancements. But this assumes a number of assumptions that we are seeking council support for. So absolutely, if council decides they don't want to pass a budget that assumes we're going to pass this legislation, then that's $3.5 million over the course of the biennium.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry, just one clarification. No, this isn't your fault. You're doing a great job. This is just something that, all I was saying is when I'm looking at this budget, I'm going to have to remove that and stick it somewhere else and find other ways to balance it. But, it's certainly no reflection on you
I didn't
at all.
say it to
You're
elicit
awesome.
that, but thank you. Okay.
My viewpoint's the same. We just do need to resolve and quickly whether the registry fee requires legislation, and if so, to make sure that it's sent over here if it's your intent to move on this item. But this kind of misunderstanding can happen, and it's nothing to be concerned about.
I trust I'll have an answer on that before I get back to my desk. So somebody that loves me, that works with me, will give me an answer and shoot me an email.
I wouldn't be
So
surprised.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, please proceed.
So the last one for the fiscal office is, again, assuming additional revenue. This is $1 million, and we are proposing to increase the transfer of surplus revenue from the certificate of title fund to the general operating fund, which is permissible by law. We have been transferring surplus dollars from title to the general fund for at least the last 2 years. I know we did it several years ago when I was here before, but I don't know if it's been continuous. But so the dollars that are in title have been identified as surplus. They are bringing in more revenue than they spend every year, and we have an existing cash balance in that fund that we are looking to draw down over the next several years.
How much is the cash balance?
It's about $5 million. And it has been growing every year because they're operating with a surplus.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
How, to the chair, to Maggie, how much can we take from that department? Is there a specific amount we can take every year, or why was it determined only $1 million to take out of the 5?
So there's no rules on how much you can take. The code just says that you can declare a surplus in the fund when there is a surplus, but it technically doesn't define it. So we picked $1 million because we were looking at how much of an operating surplus that the title has been operating with, which is, it fluctuates a little bit every year, and there were some anomalies this year because they were moving to new locations. We had a location shut down for a greater part of this year. But we were anticipating that we could take the $1 million, and if we were going to touch the cash balance, it would be minimal. So we're largely taking just the operating surplus.
And is the budget proposal $1 million one time, or is it $1 million in each of the 2 years of the biennium?
It's $1 million in each of the 2 years, so
Okay.
$2 million combined.
Okay. Right. Okay. Please proceed.
Okay.
You had something? I think he had something.
I did have a developed question, but the number was $5 million?
I'm
and
sorry,
that's
for what?
in this surplus fund is a total of $5 million?
I believe it is about $5 million, yes. I can get you the exact number.
Okay. The additional $3 million are not considered in this year or next year. So those $3 million additional dollars that are sitting there, does the administration have access to those dollars without budget approval, without new budget approval, or is it there?
Separate funds. So
Separate
the
funds.
$3 million, are you talking about the rental registry dollars?
When you said $5 million, I just
The
did
certificate
the
of
math.
title fund.
Right.
in the $5 million. And from that fund, you're taking $1 million in 2018 and $1 million in 2019?
Right, but we're not taking just from the cash balance. So I can't remember the title budget off the top of my head, but so I'm making up numbers here. But if they bring in $5 million a year, they're only spending $4 million a year. So they're already bringing in more. So like I said, we are assuming the $1 million was based on not having to dip into the cash balance in full. So we might hit it a little bit depending on the fluctuations in revenue and expenditures, but it's not going to be that the balance is going to go down by $2 million at the end of 2019.
Are you using the full amount of the surplus across these 2 years?
No.
What is the additional unused amount?
What we are drawing on is the difference between current revenue and current expenses. So the 5 million cash balance should stay relatively constant over the course of the next 2 years.
Give me a dollar amount to the amount above.
Right, so this is what I'm saying. I'm making up numbers, but the variance is the same. So if they bring in 5 million a year, they only spend 4 million. So if we didn't do this proposal at the end of 2018, they would have 6 million in the balance instead of 5. It grows every year because they're operating with the surplus. They're not eating into it. So our proposal is taking the difference between current revenue and current expenses and hopefully not touching the cash balance. Does that make sense?
To answer a question that I think the Vice President was asking, am I correct that after this budget was all and done, and if we developed some kind of a problem and you decided that the right solution was to take some additional money from this fund into the general fund, that you could do so, but it would be an item that would need to be included in a bi-monthly fiscal resolution. Is that correct?
That's correct. You could take the 5 million today as part of the, but I wouldn't recommend it. But that is technically surplus. So the 5 million is available. This activity in this area, it does fluctuate slightly. We, meaning OBM, we would never recommend drawing down cash balances in any special revenue fund completely. And it was not that long ago, actually, that general fund used to subsidize the title fund. So it's only been in the last, 6 or so years that they have these surpluses that now they benefit the general fund. It used to be the other way around. But you could take the entire 5 million. It's all surplus.
So the heart of my question truly is, if there are surplus dollars above what's reflected in how the executive is recommending to use to fill the deficit that we have, council has a responsibility of presenting a balanced budget. And if there are surplus dollars that we're not aware of, we are aware now because you mentioned it, but we just need to know what they are. Not
so
that we're going to use them, but
please don't.
They need to be on the table.
It's the cash balance of the $5 million. Okay. And this is not the time, we can go over this another time too, but when we present the schedules, the last 3 pages or 4 pages of all the schedules are the fund balances. So you can see the beginning cash balances, the revenue that comes in, the expenses that go out, and the ending cash balances. So where you see large numbers, obviously you can always call us and I can walk you through it, but that 5 million it's been reflected in the schedules as just sitting there and actually growing.
Right. Just the very concept of surplus dollars, wherever they might be, that aren't always captured here, it's important that council is aware of.
Absolutely. And this was part of the current budget too, transferring dollars. So we're proposing to increase it.
Okay. Please proceed.
The next one is the Department of Information and Technology. This one goes hand in hand with cuts that were applied to Public Works and Health and Human Services. So in total, we are assuming $1 million savings associated with the strategic sourcing initiative that Director Scott Work will discuss when Information Technology presents. The cut to IT was $300,000, the cut to HHS was $400,000, and the cut to Public Works was $300,000. And this assumes savings on largely contractual spending and supply spending as a result of they're doing reverse auctions and other changes to the procurement policies that I can't speak on because I don't know all the details, so I'm sure that Scott Work can talk about those, but we are assuming that they will largely represent themselves in these 3 budgets because these are the 3 largest as it relates to contract spending. All 3 of the affected departments have committed that if the strategic sourcing does not pan out, they can live with these cuts. So in the case of IT, if they can't find the savings through what they're proposing, they're going to cut their capital spending line. Questions? Okay. The next one is the Department of Innovation and Performance. we are proposing a reduction of about $125,000, which is the elimination of one vacant position in that department. To the miscellaneous obligations budget, which is general fund budget, we are proposing a reduction of $150,000. This represents the NOACA dues that the county pays on an annual basis. We are also proposing to transfer these to the Road and Bridge Fund. So again, not an expenditure cut, but identifying a different funding source for something that we're currently paying for. The next three are related to the 0.25% fund. So as I mentioned before, this is a sub-fund in the county's general fund. In 2017, we were transferring $5.5 million in revenue from the 0.25% fund to the general operating fund. We are proposing to increase that by $2 million in 2018 and 2019. And they are $1 million and $1 million. So I'll talk about each separately. One is the county has an agreement with the CCC FDC that we advance them, which are dubbed lease payments or rental payments, $5.4 million on an annual basis, and that is how they use that money to operate. At the end of the year, surplus dollars are supposed to be returned to the county the following year. So they do a reconciliation by contract. I think it's supposed to take place in February, and those dollars are supposed to come back to the county. In the past, the dollars have not come back to the county. This is the $10 million capital fund that I've talked to you about previously that we are in the process of transferring back to the county. This budget assumes that the $10 million capital fund is fully funded and surplus operating dollars on the part of the CCC-FDC that come back to the county can be used for general fund purposes. So with that additional million, we are proposing to increase the transfer to the general operating fund to help balance the budget. Do you have questions about that?
Yeah, can you just remind me again what the CCC-FDC is?
Cuyahoga County Convention, somebody else help me. Facilities Development Corporation.
Okay.
Thank you. They operate the convention center. And the other $1 million is just taking the operating surplus in the 0.25% fund. So this is similar to what we just discussed with the title fund. The 0.25% fund is operating with a surplus, meaning they are bringing in more revenue even after we make our transfers to the general fund. They're bringing in more revenue than expenses. So this budget assumes that we will tighten that up a little bit, decrease pretty significantly the operating surplus, and transfer another $1 million to the general operating fund to help balance the budget. The cash balance in the 0.25% fund, I just want to make a note, as I had before, is equal to more than 85% of total operating expenditures. So should there be a problem with the fund that where expenses go up or revenue goes down, we do have a bit of we have a sizable cushion there. The next one is to transfer in 2018 only $2 million from the cash balance in the 0.25% fund to the general operating fund. This assumes the transfer of $2 million from the Road and Bridge Fund to effectively reimburse the general fund for costs associated with the tunnel that goes between the Huntington Park Garage and the Hilton Hotel. So we have looked at this and have determined that certain expenses related to Lakeside Avenue do qualify for road and bridge funding, so we are going to take $2 million from the cash balance in road and bridge, transfer it to the 0.25% fund, and then transfer it to the general operating fund. And again, that's 2018 only.
So, Mr. Chair, but there's a balance in that fund, the 0.25%. So we're just not really using the money that's there from our sales tax that was intended for use for the hotel and the tunnel. Instead, we're now going to transfer road and bridge money to offset what we otherwise thought was being paid from the 0.25% fund, right?
That's correct, although I do want to clarify that the sales tax revenue that goes into the 0.25% fund is not legally dedicated to the hotel.
I understand that.
Okay, I thought you said, sorry.
Well, no, from our standpoint, okay, from my standpoint, as a council person. I thought we stuck it in some kind of box where we weren't supposed to use it for general fund dollars and use it only for hotel and tunnels and things associated with the Global Center. But in a way, this is just now taking that money, it's taking money from someplace else, that's all, that I thought was going to be paid from that fund, but it really isn't. Okay.
So if I understand this correctly, $2 million is going to be taken out of the Public Works, which is dedicated to streets, roads, and bridges. So how can Public Works afford to take $2 million out of its fund that we all know we're all lacking and wanting of more streets and roads to be repaired? How is this justified to go into the Huntington walkway and bridge?
So in terms of justification, it is legal. So we did look at this. It's $2 million that's dedicated, I'm getting there, specifically to work that was done on Lakeside. Road and Bridge Fund does have a sizable cash balance in the fund. So I think combined we're looking at maybe $30 million that's in the combined road and bridge funds. So the cash is available. And I don't dispute by any means that there are endless numbers of road projects that we could be doing this in this county. We do have capacity issues, so we don't have the staff, we don't have the infrastructure to do all the projects that we need to do. And I think that was part of the thought process that went into transferring the dollars, is that it would not be spent in the next biennium on road and bridge projects, that the $2 million was surplus.
May I continue? How does that balance then the $5 fee that we want to charge in order to increase the dollars to help with the roads and bridges and that can't be repaired because we don't have enough funds with what we have existing?
I can't answer that.
Thank you.
Councilman Tran.
Following up on Ms. Simon's comments, question, the 1/4%, you quickly responded with, but it's legal. Do you think that any taxpayer in Cotw County, or very many of them, would have thought that when the 1/4% tax was put in play to build a convention center and then extending out over to Global Center and then going into the hotel, and then we rationalized that we needed the underground connection, that the quick response would have been, yeah, but it's legal, as opposed to using that 1/4% for this entire project? I thought that the intent was that it would be used for this project.
So that was the original intent when we were looking at the time, all of the costs of the project were not known. So the box was set up in 2015. We didn't even envision the tunnel at that time. And
Who didn't envision a tunnel? I'm sorry, but there's an awful lot of people that envisioned a tunnel.
Okay, well, then I misspoke. I wasn't here in 2015, but I'm a rational taxpayer, and I think also the taxpayers would like to see if there are dollars available to support the county's mandated services, we should be using those dollars as opposed to cutting off services to citizens. If we didn't have the dollars available to transfer to the general fund, and I am clarifying that it is legal to transfer them to the general fund, I think it's an important distinction because these were also non-sales tax revenue bonds. So I want to be very careful not to say that the sales tax is supporting this issue. But I don't know how we would justify cutting programs and services to continue to have a 90% cash balance in the fund. As a rational taxpayer, I don't understand that.
I just think that that the taxpayers really anticipated that 1/4% was being utilized for that project base, and it was not something that was going to get moved around in the general fund. But that's just my recollection of the facts and the way I perceived it, and I think that just following up on Ms. Simon's comments on that, I think of a similar ilk. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
the same.
Yeah, this is just going to take further discussion, and if, you know, I don't mind if this money's just stuffed away in that box, but if we need it for services, I agree, we should look at, as a council, how we could use it. But I'm just getting a little bit concerned about using funds from that bridge fund and road fund to keep supplementing other projects and things that I want to emphasize that regionalization, and that's just something I talked about when we opened up the budget discussions, and when we start chipping that away in all these different ways, I'm going to be looking at that. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. I understand what you did. I just wanted to be clear. And as a council, we've got to decide what we want to do with this surplus of the 0.25% and how we're going to use it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please proceed.
Maggie, what is the dollar amount in the 25%, 0.25% fund?
I would call everyone's attention to the bottom of page 2 of the schedules.
So the cash balance at the end of 2017 is projected to be $45 million.
At the end of 2017,
17.
45 million.
Mm-hmm.
And of those 45 million, 1 million is going towards this non-departmental in 2018 and 1 million in 2019?
Well, that's not coming directly out of the cash balance. So 1 million that's just looking at the operating surplus. But then the other million is assuming an increase in revenue from the CCCFDC. So that, you know, if the assumptions hold water, that will not come out of the cash balance.
Mm-hmm. The $45 million you just mentioned, the original purpose was for the medical mart and the convention center?
When the tax was levied in 2007, it was not legally obligated, but yes, the intent was that it was going to support the building of the medical mart and convention center.
And it probably still deals with some maintenance that's needed, ongoing maintenance?
Yes, and those expenses are captured in this fund. So we pay the annual debt service on the medical mart. We pay the annual debt service on the hotel, which are about 35 and 20 million respectively. They'll vary every year a little bit. And then we pay the 5.4 million to the CCCFDC, which is our rent payments. That's where the surplus is coming back. That's their operating budget, essentially. And then beginning in 2017, we're making payments for the Q Arena project out of this fund.
Okay, so the 45 million is the surplus of all of those revenues and expenses you just mentioned. How much are those expenses? What is the typical overhead, so to speak?
So on an annual basis, it fluctuates a little bit, but we're spending about 55. In 2018, it'll go up to 58 million, but that's largely transfers. It's not expenses. We have to book cash transfers as expenses. So it's about $55 million a year.
And you bring in how much a year?
In 2000, well, we have been bringing in 2017, we're bringing in 70-something million, but there are some one-time sources there. In 2018, we're assuming 58 million. And in 2018, we're assuming we're going to spend 58 million. So the operating surplus has decreased to 600,000.
So in the past, you brought in 70+ million, and
that was just this year because we had one-time revenue sources. So assume about 50 million for annual revenue. It's sales tax, so it has been going up every year because our sales tax has been going up every year.
We've been paying 8% for a while now. Was it 70 million? It was 70 million last time. Give me a sense of historically. Was it 70 million before that?
It was 50 million in 2016.
Okay.
2017 includes 16 million in one-time revenue sources. Okay. But it was 50 million in 2016. I don't have 15 right in front of me, but it probably would have been about 45 or something like that million, because the sales tax has been increasing a couple percent, 3 or so percent every year for the last several years.
And so over the years, we still have about a $45 million surplus in that fund.
Yeah, we have maintained now.
Okay.
I always have to qualify because it seems every year there's something. But in 2016, we did not have an operating surplus. We had a huge operating deficit because we had one-time costs. This was the last draws for the hotel construction. And then I think that's when we fronted the money for the tunnel was in 2016, and that was $11 million. But on an annual basis, assume that it's about $50-some million.
Okay.
Because it's largely just the debt service payments, which, like I said, I think it's about 35 and 20, and then the 5.4 that goes to the CCCFDC.
Okay. So again, just my same original comment for council. There are dollars that we have to capture and be aware of as we make our decisions. These dollars aren't always reflected in the budget itself, but there are, for lack of a better term, surplus dollars. Right, 45 million.
Yeah, which the surpluses have been reflected in the schedules that we present every quarter.
Yeah, I didn't word that correctly. Thank you. But there is $45 million, and
that's just the cash balance. Yes. Which if we did, I'm sorry, I think you're trying to say something, but so if we did not proceed with the $2 million in the additional transfers, this cash balance would grow to $47 million.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
Jean, do we have additional copies of this 14-page document that has the schedules? It's come to my attention that Ms. Conwell does not have one, and I would wonder if anybody else does not have that. Is that's it? Does anybody else? You don't have it? Okay. Scott? Yes. Okay. Okay, and next is Ms. Simon.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just a statement that Maggie Keenan's, OBM, and she's here to present the numbers to us, but the discussions we're having and asking her about are policy decisions that really it's not her, she's not driving the policy, I don't think. So when we have policy questions, I think we're going to have to address those someplace else or amongst each other so we can decide what kind of policies we want to look towards. So just want to say you're the number person and you are putting together the best you can about great balanced budget, but not your place, I guess, to formulate the policy that underlies this budget. It's us and the administration. Thanks.
Ms. Simon's point is well taken. Our questions to Ms. Keenan should focus on understanding exactly what's being proposed in terms of the numbers. Please proceed.
It's going to get a lot easier now, then. Okay. So the next one is going to be easy. It's going to with numbers I can do. The next one is a transfer. This is again a cash transfer, but as we've discussed before throughout the year, included in the state budget is a $25 million payment to Cuyahoga County. It's a transition payment to wean us off the support of the MCO sales tax. So our annual loss in 2018 was projected at $27 million in sales tax. That's combined sales tax to the two funds. And the state is going to be forwarding $25 million. By law, this money has to go into a special revenue fund. We need to come, bless you, we need to come before council to transfer from that special revenue fund to the general fund. The funds can be used for any purpose that the general fund dollars can be used for. So this budget does assume utilization of that $25 million transition payment over the course of the next 3 years. We're assuming $4 million in 2018 and $12.5 million in 2019, which would then leave a balance of $8.5 million for, presumably, for 2020.
And then in addition to that, weren't there going to be another $7 million?
That hasn't been approved yet, so we're not reflecting it in this budget. If that's part of the $50 million, the statewide $50 million. If that is approved, Cuyahoga County will get additional dollars, but we're not assuming that at this point. Just based on how long it's taken to get some legislation on a permanent fix, I'm not terribly optimistic. So if it comes,
still out there.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would add that $7 million would be a very optimistic estimate on what that would be. $3 to $5 million would probably be more.
That's
likely.
what I would assume. $3 to $4 million is what I would have assumed.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Please. no one disputes that we'll use this money. The only question is what the exact mix is. Okay.
And that's the intent of it too, so that we're
Yeah.
not making drastic decisions in the next year. So the next several reductions are to the Department of Public Safety and Justice Services. One is the elimination of one administrative assistant position in the CCOMS division. CCOMS is answering the wireless 911 telephone calls. Most of the CCOMS budget is from wireless 911 money, but there are two positions, the manager and this position, that are general fund that don't qualify for the 911 money. So this is a vacant position right now, and the department is proposing to eliminate it.
Dollar amount?
I'm sorry, it's 50,500. And that's the 18 number. 2019 we inflated for the 2%, so it's 52,500. We are also proposing to eliminate the $150,000 allocation that's been in the budget for the last several years for cash matches. Originally, this money was put in the budget to provide cash matches to municipalities for fire department grants. It had not been utilized at all in any of those years. So this was also part of the reductions that were proposed for the 16-17 budget. In 2017, this was changed from firefighter cash matches to public safety cash matches, which opened up the number of municipalities that could take advantage of the money. It's my understanding that it has been allocated in full for 2017, but it has not been distributed yet.
And
that's I'm sorry, it's $150,000.
And my understanding is that the total amount per year is $250, and so that this would not represent a complete elimination. It would be a partial reduction. Is that correct?
That's not my understanding. It's 150. I can confirm that, but
could you
that's
recheck that?
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
belief is widespread over here that 250 is the base number.
Okay.
We might be wrong, but please check
Okay.
it out.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The next cuts are Public Works. This is for the capital improvement program. So I went over the CIP a little bit last Tuesday when I presented. Originally at mid-year, and actually all year, we had been presenting a budget in 18 and 19 of $15.2 million for the capital improvements plan. It has been reduced to $7.2 million in the executive's recommended budget. This is largely based on right-sizing the budget on how much we're actually going to spend in any given year. So in years past, the capital improvements plan had been approved with 20 projects. It has the full dollar value for the projects, which are estimates at the time because the projects haven't been started, and they include 100% of the project costs in each of the given years. As it happens, though, these projects often span more than 1 year. They don't get started right in January for weather or capacity reasons, and they end up taking 1, sometimes 2 or 3 years to complete. So what we've done all year, really, is look at how much cash is required to fund the CIP in each of the given years. What we have found is that we have these large surpluses in capital projects when we have been doing the budget how it used to be done here. And I have presented that. That was part of the mid-year review. We had a supplement to the mid-year document that talked about the capital projects. But we have pretty substantial cash balances in some of the project funds that we don't want to see. That means we've overfunded these projects. And in this case, it means we would have been cutting programs and services just to end up with a surplus anyway. So the expectation is that this doesn't change the projects on the plan, and I'm sure that Public Works will be talking about it when they come for their hearing. We have a complete plan for 2018 and 2019, but what this does is really say, okay, how much is actually going to be spent in those 2 years? And it's $17.2 million.
And Ms. Keenan, is the capital improvements plan that's shown in our budget resolution, is that the up-to-date version?
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Cotwell.
Through the chair to the director, so we're reducing the 10.2. So how did we get to the 10.2 to begin with? I thought it was a thought of Public Works to kind of say what they felt that the capital improvement projects would be. So even though you kind of stated that if we didn't reduce it, we'd have a surplus, what happened with that alignment of that thought for us to put the 10.2 in there in the first place? If you follow that a little bit.
Right. So it's been a work in progress, really, is the answer. That we have been looking at this for 2 years, honestly, at the capital projects, because they have not been managed as we think they probably should have been over the last couple of years. I mean, including the fiscal office. I'm not pointing fingers at Public Works. But like I mentioned, we have some projects that had huge deficits, some have had surpluses. That's not how things should go. So the 10.2 was the first pass at, okay, we have this $15 million project plan. What's really going to be spent? And the initial discussion with Public Works was they were confident we can get it down to 10.2. And then how we got to the 7 was really just continuing to refine the plan. Again, not changing the projects, but saying, okay, well, this one's really not going to start until June. You know, these expenses aren't going to hit then until next year, and just looking at the actual timing of the payments.
So they over budgeted.
The 15 million, we will likely spend 15. Well, our estimates tend to be a little high, rightfully so. We'd rather be a little bit high than a little bit low. But we will spend $15 million on these projects for the life of the projects, but it won't be in 2018.
Gotcha.
So these projects, when they're done, will total the 15.2, but it's going to be spent in increments.
So that $3 million is going to go back to the general fund.
That is part of the cut, because at mid-year we were assuming a $15.2 million plan. That's correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So still with Public Works, as I mentioned before, we have applied a reduction to Public Works for the strategic sourcing initiative. That is $300,000. That's the facilities division. Facilities is an internal service fund. It generates its revenue by charges to all of the agencies. So this does impact both the general fund and the HHS levy fund if these expenses come down. We have another reduction to the facilities division totaling $750,000. This is a $750,000 cut, which gets us a $450,000 reduction in the general fund and a $150,000 reduction in the levy fund. So as I mentioned, this fund, we charge all of the agencies for space, and that's how facilities is funded. 60% of all the facilities, the space costs hit the general fund, and 20% hit the levy fund, and the balance hits the special revenue funds that do not impact either the general or levy fund. So in order to get the 450 and the 150, we have to cut more than the sum of 450 and 150.
Quick question, Mr. Chair. So does that mean that there'll be a commensurate increase for the facilities or the agencies, or to increase their contribution toward our fund to?
No, what we're hoping is it'll be decreased. So what we're doing is allocating their costs. If the facilities division is $45 million, I think it's 40-something million dollars. So, and then we allocate that by department. Next year, we're assuming the allocations will be the $750,000 less, because their expenses will be less.
Okay.
So it's actually a cut. It will be reflected as a cut to every agency's budget. You'll see it in both places in the schedules that we
So the
provided.
statutory agencies that occupy county space or affiliated, there's no anticipation that they'll have an increase across the board. Everybody's going to hopefully see a decrease.
Yeah, that is the
Okay.
Yeah, that's the intent.
Okay.
They'll stay in their space. I mean, we're not changing anybody's space, but we're just changing how much it costs to maintain that space.
Okay.
Okay. So the last major general fund is the sheriff's office. The first cut, again, is the strategic source, or no, I'm sorry. We didn't cut the sheriff's office for strategic sourcing. $75,000, which is the elimination of a supervisor position in the sheriff's general fund budget. This is in the civil division. The sheriff is working in cooperation with the clerk of courts and combining the management of the civil divisions, so we can operate with one less supervisor. Also, we are assuming a $400,000 reduction in the sheriff's office based on outsourcing food service in the county jail. So right now, all the food service is done in-house. We order the food, food preparation, it's all done internal to the sheriff's office. We do have one estimate from vendors. There's an RFP out. This savings is based on an estimate that we received from a vendor that we are not committed to yet. There's an RFP out, so we'll see when all the bids come back and review them and make a determination, but we are assuming that we can save $400,000. The next one is
Director.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Through the chair to the director. So, what is the total cost that you saying we're doing it in-house now? How much are we paying now to do this? So we'll know what's the difference between the reduction.
So I'll get back to you with the total. I know we pay about $1.8 million for the food itself every year. Again, that fluctuates slightly just depending on the ADP in the jail, and they do a really good job in the jail of getting like deals on the food, but again, that can vary a little bit. And then the bulk of the cost, though, is the personnel. So that I'll have to get back to you because I don't have that offhand, but that would be where we're going to realize our savings is through the personnel.
So 1.8 is what roughly around what we're paying now. Is it 400,000 is what it's going to cost us, or that's just the savings?
No, the 400,000 would be the savings, and I do want to make sure that it's clear that the 1.8 is just for food. So we're paying an additional, I'm making up, $3 million or something for the personnel costs. So if it costs us 3.7 now, it'll cost us 3.3 if we were to outsource. I do want to note, and I will rely on the sheriff's office to talk about this when they come, but we did receive one, as I mentioned, we did have one proposal from a vendor to provide food service in the jail, and they had talked about taking our staff union intact. And that was part of the requirements that were in the bid specifications that they have to maintain the union.
I was just about to ask about that. Okay.
Okay.
The next one is kind of along the same lines, but we are anticipating a reduction of $1.5 million in medical costs in the county jail. This is based on switching providers. Right now, so we've had Metro Health has been the provider of medical services in the jail since, I believe, 2012? I think it was 2002, I think it's 2012 because it took a little while to get the negotiation settled. And so this assumes that we will go with another vendor. The medical costs have increased steadily over the last couple of years. Part of that is just due also to the population in the county jail. So as nobody will be surprised to hear that we have a huge population that's got behavioral health issues. They are drug addicted, and that's expensive to detox people responsibly and safely, and that impacts our costs. And we did not have those costs before Metro started. So I do want to make sure that that's clear, that we're not just saying that the costs spike for no reason. But we do have a bid from one provider who provides services to Franklin, Hamilton, and Montgomery County jails, and their estimates assume that we can save $1.5 million on our total personnel costs, or total medical costs, which includes, again, personnel, but also pharmaceuticals. There's some contracts for services, outsourcing. So when we have we do have a fully staffed clinic in the county jail, but we do have some inmates that have to go to the hospital or another facility because we can't provide what they need in the county jail. So that's included in the cost of medical as well.
Mr. Chair. Is Councilman Gallagher want to speak?
No. Ms. Simon.
So you just said they have to go to the hospital. Aren't they going to Metro now?
Now they're going to Metro.
And wouldn't that be quite a savings to send it to our own county hospital versus some private nonprofit hospital? I don't expect you to get. I'm just okay. Well,
so again, it's from my perspective, looking pretty much solely at the numbers. Not necessarily, actually. We have seen an increase in costs for what we dub outside medical costs, which is prior to Metro taking over, we did send people to the clinic, we did send them to Metro as well. And then we did send to some like urgent care facilities. I don't know who runs those, but since Metro took over, the outside medicals go exclusively to Metro.
Yep.
They are more expensive now, but what I don't know, because I don't get this detail, is the services that are being provided. So it could be before that we were sending someone to the clinic and they just needed the cast on their arm, and now we're sending someone to Metro because they need to be detoxed for 5 days, which is more expensive than putting a cast on. I'm sure the sheriff can answer those questions, but at face value, sending them to Metro is not always the least expensive.
I'm going to defer to my colleague at the right point to talk about this, but just for the newer council members, this was a huge item in committee to when we first became new council members, Councilman Gallagher, new government. We really, really worked hard, especially Councilman Gallagher, to make sure that we were able to maximize Metro's partnership and save and have quality. And that was a huge undertaking, and I just want to have my colleagues recognize that.
Council President Brady.
I'm going to defer to Councilman Gallagher.
Thank you, President. And obviously these are not questions deep for you, but when you're saying savings, sending them maybe to Metro or not to Metro, one of the things that we did do is by bringing Metro in, we saved the transfer of the patients to Metro because they were going to Metro. That's 2 sheriff's deputies, a car off the street for basically half a day. That was part of our costs. In the savings that these folks are talking about, was that factored in?
It was, and so when I'm looking at the outside medical costs, we are still sending people to Metro, and they are
not like we did.
Correct, but the numbers are not down significantly. So we are sending fewer to Metro, but we are still sending people to Metro, and they're still going with sheriff's deputies, 2 of them. But that is factored in. So what we did was look at the total personnel costs. So the county employs the nurses in the jail, and then Metro employs and we have some STNAs or I don't know, it's another kind of medical provider that's not a doctor or nurse practitioner. But so we do have the nurses in the jail, and Metro provides the physicians, and they provide nurse practitioners and all the specialty like psychiatrists. So we looked at our personnel costs, the outside medical costs, pharmacy costs, which will go up if we switch providers. And we have factored that into the $1.5 million savings, but through Metro, we gain access to 340B pricing that we will not have from another vendor. So you have to be a public hospital or a charitable clinic in order to get the 340B. Right. So, but we have factored that in. But we have taken those costs in total.
Okay.
Now we are. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
we are.
Go ahead.
We are not factoring into the 1.5 savings in the deputy costs. So if we send fewer people to Metro or to any other facility next year and there are savings on the law enforcement side, we're not factoring that in.
Mm-hmm. My concern is that you have an estimate of all these savings. When do we get to see that?
I can forward you what we have.
It should have already been forwarded, quite honestly, when you're talking about such a deep cut and a historically, really, I think, good program that was implemented on a side from safety, really, not just for the prisoners, but also for us, because we had the Levert problem.
Absolutely.
So if you have something like that is so fantastic, I would have expected we would already had that. So could we get that? It should be at somebody's fingertips now.
I'll probably have to. It's on
my
computer.
Good.
But yeah, I can.
If you can imagine, I'm very interested to
Absolutely.
see these savings.
Absolutely, I can tell you from what fiscal did. I don't want to get your hopes up that it's terribly fantastic, because we just looked at our total costs, like I said, and then all I have is the $1 figure estimate from the vendor.
Well, there are things in there that I'm looking for, the paramedicine, the
on our side, I have that.
Yeah, and the video medicine, all that stuff. must be included, obviously. The video medicine
It is included, absolutely, the telemedicine.
What
I
if
don't-
you know offhand, do you know what medical facility that they'll be dealing with here in town?
No, I don't.
So
Because
how
we don't have the vendor yet.
See, that's where I think the problem may lie. I don't know. So I'll wait for those estimates, because with Metro comes all these other extra benefits that may not be factored in. And I'm wondering if some place like the Cleveland Clinic or UH, who wasn't quick to rush to our aid when we needed it, are they going to be paying Metro for these services that may or may not be in there?
Right.
So we'll see, but it's a long slog, I think.
Oh, I agree. And those are, I mean, that's a question for the sheriff. Obviously, the details.
Exactly.
I don't have, even in the numbers that we have, I don't know what we're paying for telemedicine. I can say just the bit that I do know about the bid that went out is electronic medical records was a requirement. Epic was a requirement. So Epic is the system that both Metro and the Cleveland Clinic use. The majority of our patients, when they leave the jail, inmates, when they leave the jail, go to Metro. So we did require that the new vendor use Epic. And I'm certain that telemedicine would have been included, but that's a question for the sheriff.
That it would be.
I can get you what we prepared, which is pretty generic numbers. So I don't have details on each line item.
We have some bold savings on the table. I'd just like to see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll give you what we have, and then ask, if you have questions, let me know.
Council President Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the pharmaceuticals, you said that our costs would go up on the pharmaceuticals. Do you have a ballpark figure for that?
I believe it
number?
was $500,000.
So right off the top, we take the $500,000 out of your savings.
No, the 1.5 is net of that. So the original estimate was an assumed $2 million in savings, and then we are taking off the $500,000 because we know those costs will go up.
Okay, well, that seems to me just another way of saying it, but that's okay.
Okay.
The nurses.
Yes.
How many of the nurses? What's going to, is this the savings? What it amounts to is firing a bunch of nurses?
Largely, the savings would be in personnel, yes. So I believe.
Let's admit what it is.
I'll have to get back to you, but I believe we have between 60 and 65 nurses, is what they mentioned when the last time I had met with the jail staff. I'll have to get back to you, though, on details, but absolutely the savings are going to be the result of personnel decreases.
Thank you very much. I think it's obvious that in this particular area, we've got a lot to unpack here.
Absolutely.
And, so we will.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay, and the last one for the sheriff's office is the assumed additional revenue in the general fund from regionalizing corrections. So the sheriff's office is in talks with, as you know, we are taking over corrections for the city of Cleveland, and they are talking to the municipalities, most of whom would like to get out of the jail business. So we are looking at partnering with almost all of the municipalities in Cuyahoga County to take over the operations of the county jails. They would pay the county a per diem per prisoner, which is assumed to be $99 a day. That's what the city of Cleveland is paying. And the savings in 2018 are $1.7 million. That is net of a one-time cost in 2018 to complete some renovations in the jail to accommodate additional prisoners. And then the savings in 2019 increased to $3.8 million. I do want to note that this assumes a 20% rate of vacancy. So we're assuming that we wouldn't get 100% of our beds filled. We need to have at least 20% of the beds filled to avoid a loss. So we are going to be staffing up for this, and if we don't get the prisoners, we will be out if we aren't at least 20%. Break even is 50%.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to the director, so we're counting on the state to give us the prisoners?
The cities.
The cities.
So this would be taking over, I'm making up cities again, but Cleveland Heights will take over operation of their jail. So then they kind of get out of the business. They pay us to take care of it. The assumption is that this is it's a huge liability for the city. It is for us as well, but we're better at it, we think, and this is our business. We know how to do it. In the cities, they don't want to operate their jails. The inmates are different than they have been in the past. Most of them have behavioral health issues. That's scary for all of us. That's why we got into the Levert tragedy in the first place. But so this assumes that the cities will transfer their prisoners to the county and pay us.
So there's probably a guesstimation of how many prisoners they usually get on an annual basis and how we figured out where we should be. Or
That's correct. And I can get back to you with the number, but what I know is that our estimates assume that we'll have 80% of the number that we could hold will be filled, and if it is, we'll get this amount of revenue.
so this, I just want to be clear. So the 1.7 in 2018 and the 3.8 in 2019, is that increase in revenue? It's
Yes.
Not okay.
Yes. So the sheriff's budget has not been cut by this amount. We've increased the revenue. If the revenue doesn't come, we will be out of balance,
Thank you.
assuming that we staff up for it.
Ms. Simon.
Sure. Just a question that I'd like to explore down the road too is we're looking at bond and bail reform and reducing the amount of people in our jail system. Mm-hmm. So this 20% threshold, does that take into consideration that with the justice reform, perhaps that number may not be met or realistic in that light?
I don't know. That's a question for the sheriff's office.
Okay.
I don't think that we are assuming decreases as a result of bail reform.
Oh.
But I'm going to defer to the sheriff to
Okay, so that will be a sheriff question.
That's
I'm just
absolutely a sheriff question.
I'm just putting it out there. Hopefully you're watching, Sheriff.
That's a common police question too,
Also.
because they're the ones who bring us the prisoners. So that's a question for the courts.
Collectively, I mean, that's the ultimate goal with our justice reform is to reduce this. And I hope when we're, budgeting and thinking maybe in the next 2 years, it's not going to be a big reduction. But I think down the road, we're going to have to look at that. I hope.
Hopefully. I mean, and I would assume, I think you're right, it's probably not a 2018 issue, just because if we don't know yet, it's not. But hopefully it would be a 2019 or at least a 2020 issue.
Councilman Tuma.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as the figures of 1.7 to 3.8, is this because of additional commitments by municipalities as far as takeover by the county?
This assumes commitments on the part of the municipalities. So I will, again, I can get back to you if I just don't know where we are in terms of having cities, if they've already fully committed yet, or if we just have kind of tacit agreements. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, because that's, again, something that we'd like to know.
Oh, absolutely. And I know that the sheriff's office has been talking to all the cities, so it won't be a surprise to anyone. Right. It's not like we're completely making this up, but I just don't know if we're at the point where we have contracts or letters of intent yet.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may have inferred it a little bit about what I just asked directly. When we have the prisoners, is there a reimbursement policy associated with that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's $99 a day.
Okay, and we run it a little more efficient than $99 per day.
Well, the $99 is inclusive of all of our costs. So the county cannot make a profit from the other municipalities. So the $99 assumes the costs, all of the county costs to house these prisoners.
Okay,
and that's based on, I don't know how much you care, but it's based on that, right now we look at the total sheriff's budget divided by the ADP and consider some of our additional costs to the county. But, one extra prisoner to the county costs less than one prisoner in the Cleveland Heights jail, because we already have 2,100 in our jail.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to the director, can you explain the $99 cost last time? I remember correctly, we were somewhere in the $55 cost of what it took for us to house a prisoner. So that's a big increase.
55 seems low. So we've always, at least when I've looked at it, we've always been well, and again, it's been a couple of years, but so we were always at 85. It has bumped up a little bit with the increases in largely personnel costs. The jail is staff. That's where the money is it's staff heavy. So that includes all of the sheriff's costs, and then there are county costs as well that would be associated with taking on this. So that's how the $99 was calculated. And we're actually basing this on the agreement with the city of Cleveland. So Cleveland has agreed to pay the county the $99 a day. So we are assuming that the other municipalities will also pay $99 a day.
So when we had the old sheriff, which I should say Bova, when Bova was the sheriff, I do remember a deep conversation about the $55 increase cost or the cost that it, and so I'm just trying to think is.
I know what he's talking. So
okay.
what Chief Bova was talking about was what the county paid to house our prisoners in outside facilities. So years and years ago, we had prisoner boarding care. I don't know how many of you remember that, but we had overflow in the county jail, so we would send our prisoners to other municipalities. Bedford was a big one because they have a full-service jail, Euclid, but we sent them to almost all of the jails in the county and actually to surrounding counties. At its peak, we paid $7.8 million in prisoner boarding care. That decreased steadily beginning in around 2008 with the justice reform efforts. A lot of it was the early disposition case management process that was in the Court of Common Pleas. They're not doing it anymore, but it was really trying to dispose of the felony 3, 4s, and 5s more quickly. So that dramatically decreased the number of prisoners under the authority of the county to the point that we don't have prisoner board and care anymore. I think it's been eliminated for about 4 years now. That was the $55 a day. That is what we paid to house our prisoners in the other cities' jails.
Okay.
Okay. Does that conclude the general fund?
Excuse me, yes.
Okay, well, I think the director of budget and management and perhaps some of the council people need a break. So we're gonna take a break for 10 minutes and come back at 3 o'clock.
Gallagher, you remember those conversations?